A leap of faith, in its most commonly used meaning, is the act of believing in or accepting something intangible or unprovable, or without empirical evidence. It is an act commonly associated with religious belief, as many religions consider faith to be an essential element of piety. The phrase is commonly attributed to Søren Kierkegaard. However, he himself never used the term, as he referred to a leap as a leap to faith. A leap of faith, according to Kierkegaard, involves circularity insofar as a leap is made by faith. In his book Concluding Unscientific Postscript, he describes the core part of the leap of faith, the leap. Thinking can turn toward itself in order to think about itself, and skepticism can emerge. But this thinking about itself never accomplishes anything. Kierkegaard says thinking should serve by thinking something. Kierkegaard wants to stop thinking's self-reflection, and that is the movement that constitutes a leap. He's against people thinking about religion all day without ever doing anything. But he's also against external shows and opinions about religion and in favor of the internal movement of faith. He says, where Christianity wants to have inwardness, worldly Christendom wants outwardness, and where Christianity wants outwardness, worldly Christendom wants inwardness. But, on the other hand, he also says, the less externality the more inwardness if it is truly there. But it is also the case that the less externality, the greater the possibility that the inwardness will entirely fail to come. The externality is the watchman who awakens the sleeper. The externality is the solicitous mother who calls one. The externality is the roll call that brings the soldier to his feet. The externality is the reveille that helps one to make the great effort. But the absence of the externality can mean that the inwardness itself calls inwardly to a person, alas, but it can also mean that the inwardness will fail to come. The most dreadful thing of all is a personal existence that cannot coalesce in a conclusion, according to Kierkegaard. He asked his contemporaries if any of them had reached a conclusion about anything, or did every new premise change their convictions. The leap into sin and interfaith. Kierkegaard describes the leap using the famous story of Adam and Eve, particularly Adam's qualitative leap into sin. Adam's leap signifies a change from one quality to another, mainly the quality of possessing no sin to the quality of possessing sin. Kierkegaard maintains that the transition from one quality to another can take place only by a leap. When the transition happens, one moves directly from one state to the other, never possessing both qualities. The moment is related to the transition of the one to the many, of the many to the one, of likeness to unlikeness, and that it is the moment in which there is neither one nor many, neither A being determined nor A being combined. Boehm's note 82-85. In the moment man becomes conscious that he is born. For his antecedent state, to which he may not cling, was one of non-being. In the moment man also becomes conscious of the new birth, for his antecedent state was one of non-being. It is important to understand that Kierkegaard felt a leap of faith was necessary in accepting Christianity due to the paradoxes that exist in Christianity. In his books Philosophical Fragments and Concluding Unscientific Postscript, Kierkegaard delves deep into the paradoxes that Christianity presents. Kierkegaard's use of the term leap was in response to Lessing's ditch, which was discussed by Gotthold Ephraim Lessing in his theological writings. Kierkegaard was indebted to Lessing's writings in many ways. Lessing tried to battle rational Christianity directly, and when that failed he battled it indirectly through, what Kierkegaard called, imaginary constructions. He also used Immanuel Kant's use of the term in his 1784 essay, answering the question, what is enlightenment? Kant wrote. Lessing said, accidental truths of history can never become the proof of necessary truths of reason. Kierkegaard points out that he also said, contingent truths of history can never become the demonstrations of necessary truths of reason. Kierkegaard liked Lessing because he had a most uncommon gift of explaining what he himself had understood. With that he stopped. In our day people go further and explain more than they themselves have understood. Kierkegaard has Don Juan in either or escort young girls all in the dangerous age of being neither grown up nor children to the other side of the ditch of life as he, himself, dances over the abyss only to instantly sink down into the depths. He as Don Juan preach the gospel of pleasure to Elvira and seduces her from the convent and wonders if there is a priest who can preach the gospel of repentance and remorse with the same power as Don Juan preached his gospel. Both Lessing and Kierkegaard are discussing the agency one might use to base one's faith upon. Does history provide all the proofs necessary to cross that ugly, broad ditch? Or is there no direct and immediate transition to Christianity? Does one become a Christian in the fullness of time as Kierkegaard puts it, or is there only one proof of spirit, and that is the spirit, a unregistered trademark as proof within oneself? Whoever demands something else may get proofs in superabundance, but he is already characterized as spiritless. He also writes about this in his Concluding Unscientific Postscript. The implication of taking a leap of faith can, depending on the context, carry positive or negative connotations, as some feel it is a virtue to be able to believe in something without evidence while others feel it is foolishness. It is a hotly contested theological and philosophical concept. For instance, the association with blind faith and religion is disputed by those with deistic principles that argue reason and logic, rather than revelation or tradition, should be the basis of belief that God has existed in human form, was born and grew up. Jesus is the paradox, the absolute paradox. When Christianity becomes a scholarly enterprise, one tends to reflect oneself into Christianity, but Kierkegaard says, one should reflect oneself out of something else and become, more and more simply, a Christian. Kierkegaard was concerned that individuals would spend all their lives trying to define Christianity, define love, define God, define the Trinity, define sin, and never get to the business of actually making a decision, in time, to try to become a Christian and then acting on the basis of that decision. He discussed the inner and the outer relationship existing in belief. Compared with the Hegelian notion that the outer is the inner and the inner the outer, it certainly is extremely original. But it would be even more original if the Hegelian axiom were not only admired by the present age but also had retroactive power to abolish, backward historically, the distinction between the visible and invisible church. The invisible church is not a historical phenomenon. As such, it cannot be observed objectively at all, because it is only in subjectivity. There has to be a balance between objective and subjective knowledge. Hegel went to the extreme objective side, so Kierkegaard decided to go to the extreme subjective side. Even some theistic realms of thought do not agree with the implications that this phrase carries. For instance, C.S. Lewis argues against the idea that Christianity requires a leap of faith. One of Lewis' arguments is that supernaturalism, a basic tenet of Christianity, can be logically inferred based on a teleological argument regarding the source of human reason. Nonetheless, some Christians are less critical of the term and do accept that religion requires a leap of faith. What is often missed is that Kierkegaard himself was an Orthodox Scandinavian Lutheran in conflict with the liberal theological establishment of his day. His works built on one another and culminated with the Orthodox Lutheran conception of a God that unconditionally accepts man, faith itself being a gift from God, and that the highest moral position is reached when a person realizes this and, no longer depending upon her or himself, takes the leap of faith into the arms of a loving God. In a Lutheran context, the leap of faith becomes much clearer. Jacobi, Hegel, and C.S. Lewis wrote about Christianity in accordance with their understanding, but Kierkegaard didn't want to do that because he felt that it was too dangerous to put in writing what was most holy to himself. He said, "Not even what I am writing here is my innermost meaning. I cannot entrust myself to paper in that way, even though I see it in what is written. Think what could happen. The paper could disappear. There could be a fire where I live and I could live in uncertainty about whether it was burned or still existed. I could die and thus leave it behind me. I could lose my mind and my innermost being could be in alien hands. I could go blind and not be able to find it myself, not know whether I stood with it in my hands without asking someone else, not know whether he lied, whether he was reading what was written there or something else in order to sound me out." Kierkegaard was of the opinion that faith is something different from other things, something unexplainable, and inexplicable. The more a person tries to explain personal faith to another, the more entangled that person becomes in language and semantics, but recollection is das Ugleiche, the all at once, that always brings him back to himself. The appropriation of faith, Kierkegaard stuck to his concept of Christianity as an inner struggle where the single individual stands before God rather than before others. Because standing before God is where the decisive struggle occurs for each single individual. Each single individual who has an interest in becoming a Christian has a God relationship which is different from any other individual. The more we look to others for our God relationship, the more we have a simulated, mediated relationship with an idea. The idea, or ideal, isn't the highest. But getting the idea off the paper or the drawing board and putting it to use in life is the absolute for the Christian. In Works of Love he wrote, "Love for the neighbor does not want to be sung about, it wants to be accomplished." Christ didn't say one should think about loving the neighbor, he said, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." He put it this way in 3 discourses on imagined occasions in Concluding Unscientific Postscript and Sickness unto Death and again in Works of Love. Kierkegaard, Goethe, Marx, and Tolstoy. Kierkegaard questioned how a person changes. Some, like Hegel and Goethe, believed that an external event was required for a new epoch to begin. Kierkegaard disagreed because something might never happen in an external way that would cause a person to change and a possibility for a better life might be lost, so why not make a change because you want to and resist change because you want to do that? Marx followed after Hegel and Goethe, but Tolstoy agreed more with Kierkegaard in his view of life. Goethe may have been mocking the idea that the birth of Christ was what made him important, or he may have seriously thought that his, Goethe's, own birth made him important. Kierkegaard didn't believe that Christ had this upside-downness that wanted to reap before it sowed, or this kind of cowardliness that wanted to have certainty before it began. Goethe began his autobiography with the certainty that his life was going to have a great effect on the world stage. Within the first 20 pages of his autobiography, Goethe had pointed to the 1755 Lisbon earthquake as another great life-changing event in his life. Goethe's book was translated Truth and Poetry but was also translated Truth and Fiction. Both authors seem to be against having a fictional existence. Goethe believed the existence of Christ was being fictionalized, while Kierkegaard believed the existence Goethe wrote about in his own autobiography was fictional, and much of it was. Count Leo Tolstoy said he found out there was no God in 1838 when he was 12 years old. He had to work through this idea for the next 38 years until he could come away with a method by which he could believe, not only in God but in Christ. Kierkegaard heard the same from Hegelian philosophers and worked through his doubt to belief, but he opposed that method. His thought was to start with faith and proceed forward, making positive steps rather than always falling back to start over after doubt had prevailed. He said, "False doubt doubts everything except itself. With the help of faith, the doubt that saves doubts only itself." Kierkegaard didn't want to argue about his faith any more than he wanted to argue about why he might or might not get married or become a professor. He just wants to make the movement from possibility to actuality, and knows he'll just waste time if he tries to explain himself. I think that, just as a Christian always ought to be able to explain his faith, so also a married man ought to be able to explain his marriage, not simply to anyone who deigns to ask, but to anyone he thinks worthy of it, or even if, as in this case, unworthy, he finds it propitious to do so. Ivanhoe Part 2, pages 88-89, Hong. Tolstoy tried to explain the method he used to come to grips with the Christian religion. He acted on his beliefs by freeing his serfs, writing books to help them learn to read, and giving them land to farm and live on. He didn't argue and reason with his neighbors, he just did what he set out to do. Karl Marx complained about Hegelian philosophers and theses on Feuerbach in this way: the philosophers have only interpreted the world, in various ways, the point, however, is to change it. Walter Kaufmann changed the quote to reflect the Kierkegaardian difference in his book, From Shakespeare to Existentialism. His, Kierkegaard's, relation to philosophy is best expressed by changing one small word in Marx's famous dictum: the philosophers have only interpreted the world, in various ways, the point, however, is to change not it, as Marx said, but ourselves. Pages 202. Only in changing oneself is one equal with another according to Kierkegaard, because in Christianity all are equal before God. The world is too abstract to change, but the single individual, you yourself, that is something concrete. Kierkegaard put it this way in his Upbuilding Discourses of 1843 to 1844 and in his Upbuilding Discourses in Various Spirits 1847. The idea so frequently stressed in Holy Scripture for the purpose of elevating the lowly and humbling the mighty, the idea that God does not respect the status of persons, this idea the Apostle wants to bring to life in the single individual for application in his life. In the hallowed places, in every upbuilding view of life, the thought arises in a persona unregistered trademark soul that help him to fight the good fight with flesh and blood, with principalities and powers, and in the fight to free himself for equality before God, whether this battle is more a war of aggression against the differences that want to encumber him with worldly favoritism or a defensive war against the differences that want to make him anxious in worldly perdition. Only in this way is equality the divine law, only in this way is the struggle the truth, only in this way does the victory have validity, only when the single individual fights for himself within himself and does not unseasonably presume to help the whole world to obtain external equality, which is of very little benefit, all the less so because it never existed, if for no other reason than that everyone would come to thank him and become unequal before him. Only in this way is equality the divine law. Søren Kierkegaard, 18 Upbuilding Discourses. Hong pages 141 to 143. Are you now living in such a way that you are aware as a single individual, that in every relationship in which you relate yourself outwardly you are aware that you are also relating yourself to yourself as a single individual, that even in the relationship we human beings so beautifully call the most intimate you recollect that you have an even more intimate relationship, the relationship in which you as a single individual relate yourself to yourself before God? Søren Kierkegaard, Upbuilding Discourses in Various Spirits, March 13, 1847, copyright 1993 by Howard Hong, Princeton University Press, pages 129. The idea behind world history and constant quantification dehumanizes the quality known as the single individual and can produce soul rot due to the monotony of self-concern and self-preoccupation with anxiety about where you fit within the system. Language comes to the aid with quantities and quantities of words to explain everything. But Kierkegaard says the pathos of the ethical is to act. You are the one. The difference between Kierkegaard and Marx is that one applied everything to himself while the other applied everything to someone else or to the whole world. Appropriating information or a life view is difficult, and it's more difficult the less one relies on the opinions of others. Abraham just heard God's promises and they were unreasonable, but he had faith. This idea that the world has to be reasonable or respond to human reason is one that omits the world of the spirit. The world is abstract, the church is abstract, the world of the spirit is abstract, but the single individual is concrete if one wills to be that. And the single individual relates himself or herself to the world, the church, the world of the spirit, the environment, the established order, the educational facilities in a unique way according to Kierkegaard. The leap means to stop relating yourself to a crowd or a race and then to the world, the church, the world of the spirit, the environment, etc. Once the individual chooses to do that, the leap is made and resolutions become possibilities and the personality can be developed in freedom. Kierkegaard started out, in Either Or Part 1, by saying, you know how the prophet Nathan dealt with King David when he presumed to understand the parable the prophet had told him but was unwilling to understand that it applied to him. Then to make sure, Nathan added, "You are the man, O king." In the same way I also have continually tried to remind you that you are the one who is being discussed and you are the one who is spoken to. He discussed this again in another way in Either Or Part 2 where he begins, the aesthetic view also considers the personality in relation to the surrounding world, and the expression for this is in its recurrence in the personality of enjoyment. But the aesthetic expression for enjoyment in its relation to the personality is mood. That is, the personality is present in the mood, but it is dimly present. The mood of the person who lives ethically is centralized. He is not in the mood, and he is not mood, but he has mood and has the mood within himself. What he works for is continuity, and this is always the master of mood. His life does not lack mood, indeed, it has a total mood. But this is acquired. it is what would be called equal temperamentum, even disposition. But this is no aesthetic mood, and no person has it by nature or immediately. Later, in 1845, he repeated the same point in Stages on Life's Way with a story about an individual with an addiction to gambling and another individual who was a gambler but wasn't in despair because of it. Kierkegaard reiterated his emphasis on the single individual learning how to make a resolution throughout his writings. Here is a beautiful prayer from his April 26, 1848 book Christian Discourses. Notes, Dictionary.com definition of leap of faith. Hannay, Alistair, and Gordon Marino. The Cambridge Companion to Kierkegaard. Cambridge, ISBN 0-521-47719-0. Concluding Unscientific Postscript, Hong pages 335, Fear and Trembling Repetition, 1843, Hong pages 68 ff, Practice and Christianity, Hong pages 133 ff. Concluding Unscientific Postscript, Hong pages 607 ff, Works of Love, Hong pages 146, Concluding Postscript, pages 382, Hong translation, Søren Kierkegaard, Stages on Life's Way, Hong pages 232, Søren Kierkegaard, Philosophical Fragments pages 15, see Concluding Postscript, Hong. Pages 61 ff and 93 ff, Concluding Unscientific Postscript, Vol I, Hong pages 114, 263-266, 381, 512, 617. See Lessing's Nathan the Wise archive.org, What is Enlightenment, Lessing's Theological Writings, On the Proof of the Spirit and of Power, Chadwick, pages 53, Concluding Unscientific Postscript, Vol I pages 97, Fear and Trembling, Note pages 88, Lessing, On the Proof of the Spirit and of Power, Either or Part 1, Swenson. Pages 107, 128-129, 133-134, Either or Part 1, Swenson. Pages 191-197, Lessing, Theological Writings pages 55, Concluding Unscientific Postscript Vol I, pages 49, Søren Kierkegaard, Philosophical Fragments pages 12-13, The Concept of Anxiety, Nickel, pages 95, Concluding Unscientific Postscript, Vol I, Hong C pages 208-225, Søren Kierkegaard, Point of View, Lowry pages 144, Concluding Unscientific Postscript, Vol. I pages 54, Concluding Unscientific Postscript pages 21, 105-106, 193-200, Works of Love, Chapter 2b You Shall Love the Neighbor pages 44 ff, http, Bible CC 94-9 HTM Psalm 94.9 Bible, Either or, Swenson, Preface, 18 Upbuilding Discourses, Hong, One Who Prays Aright Struggles in Prayer and is Victorious and that God is Victorious pages 380-381, http, archive.org Goethe of Pergamode/2 Up the Autobiography of Goethe, Truth and Poetry. From My Own Life pages 19-20, Tolstoy, My Confession pages 1, Tolstoy, Wikisource, What I Believe. What I Believe. LibriVox.org, Søren Kierkegaard, Philosophical Fragments, 1844, Swenson pages 137, Søren Kierkegaard, Concluding Unscientific Postscript, Vol I, pages 314-315 Hong translation, see Søren Kierkegaard, 18 Upbuilding Discourses, pages 86, 18 Upbuilding Discourses, pages 206-207, Concluding Unscientific Postscript pages 389-390 Either or Part 2 14-16, 24-25 Hong, according to Kierkegaard, Young and Talleyrand say language exists to conceal thought, namely to conceal that one has none. The Concept of Anxiety, Ulm, pages 108, see Stages on Life's Way, 1845, by Søren Kierkegaard, Hong translation pages 310. He didn't want to just have a presupposition that God exists, but he wanted to act with that presupposition in mind. He writes about his presupposition, his wish, his intelligence. Either or Part 1, pages 5. Swenson 2 Samuel 12.7, Søren Kierkegaard Either Oregon, 1843 2 pages 229 to 230. Hong. References, Kierkegaard, Søren The Concept of Anxiety edited by Reidar Omt. Princeton, Princeton University Press. External links, Gotthold Lessing, Lessing's Theological Writings, Selections in Translation Stanford University Press, June 1, 1957, Center on Capitalism and Society 200th Anniversary of Søren Kierkegaard Leap of Faith, Jack Crabtree explaining Kierkegaard,